This week I want to talk about the festival that happened immediately after the Day of Atonement, okay? And so on the calendar, they had the Day of Atonement was, I think, 10 days after the beginning of the year, and then 5 days after that, they began what they called the Feast of Tabernacles. All right? And so we're going to start in Leviticus again. We're starting back at the old, or the was, in Leviticus chapter 23. This is law by God. He sets this up for His people. And He says this. He says, remember that this 7-day festival to the Lord, the festival of shelters, or tabernacles, begins on the 15th day of the appointed month, after you have harvested all the produce of the land. The first day and the 8th day of the festival will be days of complete rest. On the first day, gather branches from magnificent trees, palm fronds, boughs from leafy trees, willows that grow by the streams, and then celebrate with joy before the Lord your God for 7 days. You must observe this festival to the Lord for 7 days every year. This is a permanent law for you, and it must be observed in the appointed month from generation to generation. For 7 days you must live outside in little shelters. All the native-born Israelites must live in shelters. This will remind each new generation of Israelites that I made their ancestors live in shelters when I rescued them from the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And so what we see here is this festival that the Jewish people call Sukkot. All right? And Sukkot was literally, and still is to Jewish people, an extremely important holiday that comes around every year. And they literally back then would construct these little wooden houses, and they would have some kind of it would kind of look like a lean-to of sorts, but then the roof of it would be covered with branches of trees, specifically palm trees. But they were not to sew them together and make it waterproof. They actually had to leave holes in it so that they could see the night sky and think about God inside their shelter. Jewish people still do this today. If they have a balcony outside their home, a lot of times they will build one of these shelters sitting outside. Most Jewish people do not sleep in it now, like they did back then, but they do meet and have meals inside this shelter every night of that week of Sukkot. So the temporary shelters to God, what He was trying to remind them was that this world is temporary. Right now you and I are walking in a tent, right? We're a temporary being. At some point we will leave this world, and our soul will go on to our eternity. And so this was a constant reminder that God wanted them to remember that this is a very tiny portion of their existence. That the main portion of their existence will be in eternity someday. And so therefore, He told them that they needed to stay inside these tents, or these little shelters, all week long. Also, He was very specific about what He wanted to cover it. Palm branches in their culture were extremely important. And palm branches had multiple meanings, but mostly these four. It says they meant provision and protection. And so that was a sign that God provides, and that they needed to trust God for their daily needs. And so as the palm tree leaves came out, they were to think that God was providing for them, just like He had in the wilderness, for 40 years as they wandered around in the desert and were lost and living in these shelters for real back then. every time, every space that they landed, God provided the shelter materials for them. It's not like they carried all of the things along with them. God provided the food, the shelter, everything that they need, including the water. It also means, palm leaves mean victory and hope. And so this is giant because God delivered his people from slavery, from bondage. And so palm trees were also a representation of their delivery. Whenever Solomon built the true first temple, he carved giant palm leaves in the temple as provision, as victory, as everything that God had promised and delivered for them. Also, whenever Jesus comes into Jerusalem, the people grab what? Palm leaves. And they all stand out on the road and they wave palm leaves over Jesus. They weren't just trying to find something to wave. No, it was a symbol of victory and hope in God's provision. The palm tree leaves meant something to them. Their culture is very, very intent. Like everything means something to them that they do. Over time, though, now God only really put those two regulations into the festival, but mankind steps in and starts adding some extra details, right? And so things have changed way far from where they began biblically, back when the Bible was written all the way to Jesus' time, all right? And what happened is the priests started adding some rituals. Now what we need to keep reminding is Jesus lived in this time, and he grew up in this time. And so Jesus had to pilgrimage to a place to do the Festival of Shelters because he was a Jewish male, all right? And so this was something Jesus grew up doing. Like he loved going to this event. It was an extremely joyous event. In Deuteronomy it says that it was to be a giant celebration. Every night they celebrated giant, all right? And so the priests on the last day, what they would do is they would get a bucket. I'm sure it was fancy, and they would go to the Siloam spring specifically. They would fill it full of water, and they would walk back to the temple and they would dump it on the altar. And this was called the drawing of the water. And what this symbolized was this. Unlike us, fall and harvest is at the end of our season, right? Like spring kind of makes the front of our season, and then growth, and then we have the summer where it's all growing, and then by the fall harvest, this is the end. And then for us, in our Western culture, the winter just kind of goes into hibernation. That was not their culture. The harvest actually marked the beginning of their calendar. Yom Kippur was the beginning of the Jewish calendar. And so here they had this giant party, this giant festival, celebrating all that God had done. And now they were going to pray for their next year of, this was kind of like their New Year's prayer of God, please bring the rain, because this was the rainy season coming. And if it had good rain, they would have good crops. And so they very much wanted that. And so the watering, drawing of the water was to pray for rain. They would cry for rain and fertility, and they would trust God for their future promises. All right? So all of this was set up. And now we're moving into the Jesus time. We're going to jump to John chapter 7, when Jesus actually is there at a festival of shelters. And Jesus' brothers in the beginning of chapter 7, they're like, hey, it's time for us to go to the festival. You know we all have to go. And Jesus is like, I don't know. I'm going to stay behind. And his brothers are like, yeah, that's a good plan because everybody's trying to get you right now. And so you stay safe. We're going to go on. But what they didn't know is Jesus has his own rules, his own directions, and he sneaks onto the festival. And it makes me kind of think because Jesus never sinned and he never did wrong. And he knew God wanted him to go to the festival. And so it kind of makes me wonder if that's not why he showed up. But if he shows up in giant tribe of followers, that gets attention. So Jesus sneaks in and he starts teaching in the temple. And if you want to go back and read chapter 7 at some point, you can. But definitely he catches ears of a lot of people. And then it says on the last day, so he gets there midweek, and on the last day, on 37, last day of what? The last day of the Festival of Shelters. It says the climax of the festival, Jesus stood and shouted to the crowds, anyone who is thirsty may come to me. Anyone who believes in me may come and drink. For the scriptures declare, rivers of living water will flow from his heart. When he said living water, he was speaking of the Spirit, who would be given to everyone believing in him. But the Spirit had not yet been given, because Jesus had not yet entered into his glory. Now, what is Jesus talking about? Context matters. Context matters, right? Like, he's in the middle of the festival, and then he's at the end. And we know at the end comes this very ritualistic, everybody walks down to the pool of Siloam, dips out water. They said that they would have trumpets, they would have people singing. It was this giant procession. Everybody went down, everybody went back up, everybody watched the priest dump, not back in there, but out here in the women's courtyard is where everybody was allowed. And so they would dump the water on the altar out there for everybody to see. Now Jesus is a part of this, and it makes sense because he goes off and says, I'm the living water. And so if we don't realize what they had just done in this festival, we don't realize that Jesus once again is making a teachable moment. And he's telling us that he is what they should be worried about. You see, they ritualistically were praying for God to provide. And Jesus drops a truth bomb of, hello, I'm already here. God has already provided. They were focused on all of their crops, all of their future, all of their earthly things, even their own bodies of like being able to eat and not starve to death, right? But Jesus is like, I'm really all you need. I'm the living water. Like, you are focused on all of this more, but no, I am the living water. And so he drops this to them, and they're listening, because if we go on down a little bit, it says in verse 40, when the crowds heard him say this, some of them declared, surely this man is the prophet we've been expecting. Others said, he is the Messiah. And still others said, but he can't be. Will the Messiah come from Galilee? For the scriptures clearly state that the Messiah will be born of a royal line of David in Bethlehem, the village where King David was born. So the crowd was divided about him. Some even wanted him arrested, but no one someone laid a hand on him. Now you and I know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, right? And he relocated later. Why didn't he just step in and say, hey, I was born in Bethlehem. I am a descendant of David. It's because it just didn't matter at that point. He wasn't going to argue with them. But there were a few people in the space who it clicked and they were like, maybe he is the Messiah. The way he talks, the way he teaches, we've been listening to him all week in the temple and talking to different crowds, and so maybe he is. But then there were others that are like, I don't think so. Because he didn't come from the right place, he's not from the right family, and so I don't think that he is. And so there was this divide in the crowd, right? And so there was this internal debate happening in between both. Now 2 weeks ago, Josh preached on the church of Laodicea, right? The lukewarm church. And so the scripture there says that you have to be either hot or cold, but if you're lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth, right? And so these people are kind of in the middle, and they're hanging here thinking, now some of the people in the crowd believed, right? Like maybe he had some disciples at this moment, like maybe they were, I don't know who all was with Jesus because he snuck in, right? And so, but there were people in the crowd that believed, and there were people in the crowd that did not believe. And so you have these people who are kind of walking down the middle of the line, all right, trying to figure out what's happening. Now let's fast forward into what will be, all right, moving to Revelation chapter 20. And I'm going to skip through some of this, and I'm not going to read it all because it would take a long time. But I want to be in verse 11. Now this is where we were finding ourselves last week, in heaven, in the great throne room, all right? And one is seated on the throne, and there are 24 elders in a circle around, and there's some kind of crazy looking creatures also in the room, and I think maybe it said millions of angels circling, all right? And so this giant worship service is happening, and everybody is on their knees bowing and singing, holy, holy, holy to Jesus, all right? But then God kind of shifts John, and different things happen. Like I've jumped several chapters here, but I'm going to read here on the next part. It says, and then I saw a great white throne, and the one sitting on it. The earth and sky fled from his presence, but they found no place to hide. I saw the dead, both great and small, standing before God's throne. And the books were opened, including the book of life. And the dead were judged according to what they had done. Now, I want you to think about what they had done. I have a note in my Bible. It's not what they had planned, but it's what they had done. You see, there were several people that walked along with Jesus. And you think, man, if I walked with Jesus, I mean, it would have been a done deal. Like this is Missouri. Show me, right? If I walked with him and I saw him heal people, then that would have been a flat out, yes, I'm following Jesus. Like all I have to do is just see it. God, like show me exactly something tangible, something that I can understand, something like there's no doubt that you're real. The people who did and the people who followed him are right beside at this great throne of judgment, beside the people who didn't, and the people who were in the middle. And they thought, maybe, maybe not, I don't know. They're all up there together. We're all going to be up there together. And it says that they'll be judged by what they had done. It's not that they had planned to do it. How many of us have talked to somebody in our life, or maybe we've been that person, who think that I will get my stuff together, I will start doing this as soon as I am this. Right? Like when we're young, we think when I get a little bit older, that's when I'm going to get my stuff together, and I'm going to go to church, I'm going to be a part of the church. We make like these plans of when we're older, right? And then we get a little bit older, and I'm like, no, like I'm going to truly, I'm going to get plugged in, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. When I'm a little bit older, I'm going to have more time to spend with you, God. I'm going to set this time apart. When I get older, I'm going to serve you in this capacity. When I get older, I'm going to give to you in this capacity. And we make all these plans. But then when we get a little bit older, we think, when I get a little bit older, right? And we're all guilty of this at some point. Because we get really busy in our day, and we get to praying about today and our immediate future. God, we need this right now. And we forget to focus on the later, right? Like the eternity part. And how many people do you think are going to walk on this earth and have walked on this earth and had great intentions of getting it right at some point, and then something happens and they just ran out of time and it didn't happen? We're not promised tomorrow. We're not even promised this afternoon. But we are here right now listening. And these people had this opportunity walking beside Jesus, and we can judge them and think, yeah, if I were walking by Jesus, I would, these people are stupid. They have no clue. What? They're blind. He was right with them. How can they not believe? But then Jesus does all of these miraculous things in our life, and we keep on tempting, and we keep on testing, and we're like, but wait. I'll get there when I ... And I make really good plans, but then when I get there, it didn't actually happen, and I push it off and I push it off. How many people are going to be at this final judgment on the wrong side of the fence just because they pushed it off and they thought, I have more time and I'll do it later? If we skip down to verse 5 of chapter 21, it says this. It says, and the one sitting on the throne said, look, I am making everything new. And then he said to me, write this down, for what I tell you is trustworthy and true. And he also said, it is finished. We've heard that before, right? I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To all who are thirsty, I will give freely from the springs of the water of life. All who are victorious will inherit all these blessings. And I will be their God, and they will be my children. As we look in the scripture last week, as we look in the scripture this week, this is lined up all the way through. This is how consistent God is. The beginning of the Bible, of the Old Testament, matches up just great with the middle of the Bible in the Jesus years, to the end of the Bible in the Revelation. It truly is what was, what is, and what will be forever. If you guys want to stand up, and we're just going to have this time of prayer. I cannot emphasize enough, guys, that you're not promised tomorrow. This week in our community, in the Gainesville community, in the Mansfield community, there were lives taken immediately. And they had no idea that that was their last breath to breathe. We are not promised tomorrow. We can pray for tomorrow. We can plan for tomorrow. But if we do not get focused on today and what God is doing today and His blessings, and have Him as the King of our heart and the focus of our lives, then someday we're all going to be up here in the great throne room of judgment, and we're going to answer for the things that we have done and the things that we have not done. Plans aren't going to get us very far. God,